Thanks again for having me here. One of the things I found kind of interesting when I was putting this together is that there's a lot of different ways that I could actually have structured this talk. Food's really kind of a key issue. I could have actually structured it from a standpoint of climate change, from a standpoint of food security, from a standpoint of social justice, or even resilience. But since we're here with the School of Sustainability, I wanted to go ahead and bring this down from a standpoint of sustainability. And when I really started getting involved with sustainability, after that first step of really trying to understand what sustainability is, and really the next step was to understand why it's important. Why are we pushing for sustainability? And one of the things that I ran into was kind of the understanding that a lot of the processes that are kind of falling apart. These are processes that we really rely on heavily for a measure of stability. We have so many things in our society they're really dependent on stability. We need stability in our food supply. We need stability in our supply chain. We need climate stability, and a lot of the um, abundance that we have comes from that stability. So as these various systems start to destabilize, it throws a lot of certainty into uncertainty, I guess would be the way of saying that. And so, looking at some of the things that are really starting to destabilize, which is really pushing sustainability interest forward, we're looking at atmospheric carbon levels are rising, climate instability is rising, drought, flooding, urban heat island effect, erosion, dust storms. And one of the things, as a person who ever since I was a child, my hobby was creating ecosystems, and as somebody who really does a lot of studying of ecosystems and how they work and how to build them, one of the things that really jumps out at me about this list is that everything on this list, and there are more things. It's not an exhaustive list, but everything on this list is something that is at least partially managed and maintained by functional ecosystems. And that's something I think is that's really important. Is because we live in a world where we tend to treat our ecosystems either as disposable or as a resource. So we tend to mine the ecosystems and take what we want from them, leaving them damaged, or we just poison them into non-existence, or we disrupt them by our presence. Um, and so, I wanted to kind of jump a little bit into. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can hide my camera here. Stop video. Okay, get that out of the way. So one of the things that so I'm going to jump a little bit back to like third grade science here. What is an ecosystem and what does it do? An ecosystem is sort of a weird conglomeration of relationships between a wide variety of organisms. Some of those relationships are cooperative and some of them are competitive. Some of them are downright combative. But when you get all of those relationships in place, and it's one of the most complex things that can possibly exist, an ecosystem creates a situation where everything thrives. An ecosystem maintains soil chemistry, especially the soil carbon. It pulls the carbon down into the soil and uses that to feed soil organisms. And I think a lot of people don't really realize just how important soil is. It's one of the most important things there is, and it's very much alive. And the soil does the ecosystem inside the soil does a lot of the work in that overall ecosystems. But they also maintain water quality, they maintain air quality. Something that's really important about ecosystems is that an ecosystem must include a wide diversity of different things. It includes animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, protozoa, microarthropods, all kinds of different organisms that all kind of work together. And I'm gonna pick for just a second on aquaponics here. One of the things that I've heard people say is that, well, aquaponics has plants and animals, so it's a whole ecosystem. And it's really not. An ecosystem is cyclic in nature, and it sort of rolls forward, basically processing uh, both the energy that the plants pull in from the sun, and nutrients that are passing through from plant to animal to fungi to soil to arthropods to all the way around. And so you've got this cyclic system. And so let's say you've got an aquaponic system where you have the fish that are producing waste, you have the bacteria that are processing that waste, and then you have the plants that are taking up the waste. You have a lovely little triangle there. And if you think of it as kind of a wheel that's trying to roll forward, a triangle doesn't make a very good wheel. It tends to kind of flop. It requires a lot of effort to keep that triangle rolling. And that's really a lot of what you tend to see in aquaponics, for example, is really it's there's a fair amount of human maintenance just to make sure that that wheel keeps rolling. And if you add earthworms, which is well, something that a lot of aquaponic systems do, it helps. But you get to a square, you're still not a circle. If you really need a full, complete ecosystem, and you start adding in fungi, you have mycorrhizal fungi, you have saprophytic fungi, you have a whole bunch of different kinds of organisms, the bacteria, you've got um, protozoa, all of these different things. And each one, as it gets added in there, it rounds out that wheel and helps that wheel really get rolling better and better, because the relationships that form have just millions, if not billions, of years of evolutionary history behind them. We're designed to function this way. And then, of course, biodiversity is something that is super, super critical. An ecosystem can function without biodiversity, but if you think about it as a wheel, you add the biodiversity, your wheel becomes a ball. It's less likely to fall sideways. And so keeping these ecosystems rolling is really important. And unfortunately, there's really only two ways to do it. Either you completely leave them alone, and just our mere presence is actually an effect on the ecosystem. Roads affect ecosystems, drainage channels affect ecosystems. Even if there's almost never anybody going out there, it changes the movement of the organisms in the ecosystem, which changes their behavior, which changes how they interact with each other. And some of these things have some fairly big reactions. So either we completely leave them alone, or we kind of need to get in there and actually be an active participant in the ecosystem, and actually engaging with the ecosystem, and managing that ecosystem. This is a kind of a perfect example here. You see this really stark dividing line between two areas, and the only difference between those is the watering system that was in place on the right, whereas the system on the left, which has the same access to seeds and the same soil, is completely barren because it's just not getting the regular water that the system on the right has. But there's just an incredible diversity of plants and weeds, and if you were to get in there, there's fungi and there's insects and birds that all come to the stuff on the right. And so you can just see just how big of a difference just little pieces of management happen. So one of the things then that we need to try and figure out is we need to, if we're gonna get to those services that the ecosystem is trying to balance of our world, we need to engage with those services. How do we do that? And just like any other organism, we primarily engage through our food. It's a motivating factor that really pushes us to go, oh, okay, I'm going to be more and more a part of this whole process. And that's really the driving principles behind regenerative agriculture. This is a term that's becoming more and more in use. Obviously, it's something that certain indigenous societies have been doing for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. I would say that any society that has lasted for more than a couple thousand years is practicing this on some level, and any society that drove itself straight into the ground is probably because they weren't doing this. That's how important regenerative agriculture is. You cannot destroy your soils and hope to live. So as this term becomes more and more prevalent, there are, of course, a lot of people who are seeking to um, kind of put a definition around it. And I wouldn't say that I haven't seen that there's any solid definition that's really settled out, but there's three basic principles that really drive regenerative agriculture. The first is that it creates food, which is of course the agriculture side of things. But regenerative agriculture builds soil. Like I said, that soil, that living soil ecosystem is super, super critical. It pulls the nutrients out from deep in the soil. It feeds them to the plants. It processes everything that comes towards it. And it really is really super important. And then the last thing is that it creates habitat. You need that biodiversity. And even if you get it just like in an urban area where you have bugs and lizards and birds and cats, you still need that habitat. You need that biodiversity. And if you're going to get, of course, if you're going to get the biodiversity, you need the habitat. The problem with regenerative agriculture from a widespread use standpoint is that it's got a couple of problems. The first is that it's management intensive. It's something where you need a really hands-on approach. Someone has to kind of know what they're doing to help create uh, the right conditions, because it's so easy if you're just there and you're not paying attention, or if you're fighting against it by spraying pesticides and trying to kill whatever pest is coming at you, you're actually actively working against the ecosystem. So it's really important that you have somebody managing the ecosystem. And of course, one person can do it for a fairly large area. A lot of this is done currently out in rural areas, and one person or a small team of people can manage thousands or even tens of thousands of acres, and do it very, very well. But again, that gets us to the second one, which is that it requires space. So again, it's something where if the larger the animals, which of course some of those larger animals, the deer and the elk and javelinas and whatnot, they require acres and acres to meet their food needs. And so, having the smaller of a space you have, the harder it is to get the animals into that space and have them really function effectively. So again, thousands of acres works really, really great. 2 acres is kind of a hard sell. A quarter of an acre, which is what we see in a lot of our lots here in urban areas, is really, really hard. And then, of course, the last piece is that it requires expertise. You've got to set it up, understanding how the different organisms are going to interact with each other. What are going to be your positive feedback loops? What are going to be your negative feedback loops? And that expertise comes, again, kind of back into the management side of things. So the big question is, how do we bring regenerative agriculture into urban areas? And one of the things that we talk about is, we understand there's a number of different methods for regenerative agriculture, and we understand them pretty well as they apply to rural areas. The problem is, in urban areas, we have a completely different set of pluses and minuses, pros and cons, situations, benefits, than we have in rural areas. For the one thing is, we're not going to have hundreds of acres all in one place. It tends to get divided up, and you may get a couple of acres here and there, but it's going to be separated from other lenses of ecosystem, and there aren't necessarily going to be good corridors for them. So it really kind of needs to be managed a little bit differently. And one of the big advantages that we've got is actually, well, actually, let me back up just a little bit here. So before we really talk about regenerative agriculture in urban areas, I wanted to talk a little bit about regular agriculture in urban areas and some of the challenges that we run into there. So we have kind of an interesting situation over the last several years, and even increased just this year. There's a huge demand for locally produced food, and usually local means within 10 miles. But you know, most people understand that as close as you can is as good as you're going to get. So farmers markets are always looking for locally produced food, and the supply really isn't meeting the demand. If anything, while this demand for urban agriculture is rising, the supply is actually decreasing a bit. And there's several reasons for that. The first is the cost of land. You know, you can buy, you know, 2 acres in an urban area for the same price that it might cost you to buy 200 acres or more out in a rural area. So you're gonna be spending a lot more money on just the land. Then there's the urban planning principle of best and highest use, and the idea there is that you know, we need to be efficient with our land, and we need to use it for the best use. And agriculture pretty much always falls to the bottom of that list. If somebody else wants the land for something, they can actually exert enormous pressure on that agriculture to drive it out and let that land get to its best and highest use. Then, of course, if you've got less land that you're trying to make money off of, you need to be really using the best and most efficient growing methods, which is going to lead to equipment and infrastructure, and that all costs lots of money. And then, of course, all of those costs add up to barriers to entry. You have to have a huge outlay of capital to really get started. Anything what people would normally consider um, urban agriculture. And then, of course, there's this question: will it scale? I get this one thrown at me so many times, and it's funny because most people seem to think it's my kryptonite. It's like, oh well, yeah, but you've got this great idea. Will it scale? And I think you know, the real question is less about will it scale, and either should it scale, or what's the best way to make it scale. And I think when we look at urban areas, we shouldn't be thinking of, or like a rural area where you've got lots of land and how am I going to scale it? Think more Airbnb versus Motel 6. You know, the rural model is Motel 6. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to clear a big patch of land, I'm going to build a motel. I've got lots of rooms, I can rent them out. Whereas Airbnb is a little bit more crowdfunded. We have just as much land in urban areas as they have in rural areas, but it's all divided up into little tiny parcels that most people call backyards. In England, they call them gardens. But it's a big space of anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand square feet that can actually be repurposed for food production. In a lot of cases, they aren't even being used for much of anything. Sometimes, if you look over your fence and you find out your neighbor's just got a big old patch of bare dirt back there because they don't really need it. So that's something that we actually have as an incredible resource. And land is a resource, and we're not really using it as one. One of the other resources that we've got is what I call the Tesla and solar panel crowd. These are people who are going to be, you know, they have an awareness that sustainability is important. They want to be a part of the solution. They're willing to spend the money needed to get there. They're willing to put themselves at a little bit of an inconvenience if necessary to get there. But they really, it's important to them that they be part of the solution. And you know, the problem though also is you have to understand that these people have a modern lifestyle. They have resources, they have spare time that they want to spend on all of the modern urban amenities, and you can't ask them to give that up. So it's you've got to kind of hit that narrow space between what they're willing to give and what they're not willing to give up. So if you're really going to talk about bringing regenerative agriculture into those urban areas, um, then there's a certain set of requirements really that you need to pay attention to. The first, I'll tackle the first half of the list here. It needs to be productive. It needs to be low water use. It needs to be sustainable. That's kind of your basic pay to play list. Everybody's got to hit that list. And there's a dozen or more different players out there that are hitting that. Tower gardens fit that list. Aquaponics fit that list. Hydroponics, aeroponics. There's a bunch of different systems on the market that all do exactly that, but they aren't really hitting penetration in the market because there's still labor involved. There's still some other pieces. And then, of course, if we want to get to regenerative agriculture, it needs to be more than sustainable. It needs to not just sustain what we have, it needs to regenerate what's possible. Then you've got the attractive piece. There's plenty of people who take a look at some of the options out there and they say, hey, that's really cool, but not in my backyard. It's the NIMBY effect. And you know, if you want to hit the soccer mom crowd, the people who really care about what they look like. They aren't the hobbyists who are fine with the PVC pipes and wires and all that stuff, metal framing that's sitting around. Then you have to find something that's going to be attractive to them, that they can take their friends into their backyard and show off with pride. That's actually really, really important if you want to, you know, hit into that market. Then of course the last piece is it's got to be easy, and that's really kind of the hard part. So I wanted to take a second here and talk about the difference between management and technology. So both management and technology are the application of human knowledge, human ingenuity, human creativity, but management is the application of knowledge right up close in person, hands-on, one at a time, dealing with something that needs attention. That's what management is. Technology is actually the application of human ingenuity at a distance. It's the ability to build something that can do something for you so that the end user doesn't have to have all of the knowledge that the person who designed it has. And I think that's something that regenerative agriculture, as I said, is management intensive. It is not super technology intensive. So that's basically what I've tried to create with the LEHR Garden. LEHR is an acronym for linking ecosystem and hardware for regeneration. So it actually brings the full ecosystem services forward, and then it combines it with the technology, the hardware, to help. And really the important part of that is how is that hardware being used? How's that technology being used? It is not being used to replace the ecosystem, which is often where that happens. What happens in a LEHR garden is that the technology is being used to enhance and support the ecosystem services. Now, the LEHR garden functions mostly because it looks at soil differently. So most people consider soil to be a repository of nutrients. A LEHR garden looks at soil as a food source for soil organisms. You have your little pet, your pet. What do you do with your pets? You feed your pets. So the soil itself is created out of urban waste, compost, and wood. So the first principle in the 7 pillars of a LEHR garden is hugelkultur, which is the addition of large amounts of woody material into the garden soil. And when I actually create a LEHR garden, there's very little that you would say is actually soil that goes in there. It's mostly woody material. And then we start the process of turning that into uh, soil with mushrooms. Now, the mushrooms, if you're careful about what you choose, the mushrooms will actually produce a crop, an edible crop. You have to understand what it is you're getting so that you make sure you're identifying, because it's hard to exclude all of the other mushrooms. But you know, you can actually get a crop of mushrooms out there. The mushrooms will break down the woody material. The little stuff will actually break it down within just a couple of months. And then once the mushrooms have softened it up, the earthworms move in. The earthworms start the process of really, through their castings, creating soil, and creating something that really looks and acts like soil, and that the plants respond to as soil. Um, then you have the aquaculture. Because a Lear garden is water efficient, it captures the water, recirculates the water, and allows you to have very low water use. And as long as you're capturing water, you can actually, that becomes a really, really wonderful place of adding the animal agriculture, at least part of the animals of that, into that ecosystem services. The waste from the fish actually become fertilizer the uh, for the garden soil, for the plants. It helps support the plants while the soil creation is happening around them. Then, of course, the next pillar is the plants themselves, and so the plants are actually planted on day one while the soil is being made around them, but they get the nutrients they need from the fish, from the compost that's being added. Um, and so it actually becomes productive pretty much from day one. The last biological pillar is biodiversity. By interplanting a lot of different vegetables, more or less right on top of each other, you can plant really densely in a Lear garden. And then interplanting a lot of herbs and flowers and different plants there, you create the habitat that you need to bring those beneficial insects in, the predators and the birds and all of those things that are going to actually create that complete closed ecosystem that you need for everything to move forward. So in doing all of this, what does a Lear garden do? So a Lear garden uses no chemical input. So anything that we put in there is going to potentially harm the fish because the water cycles back through. So it doesn't use any fertilizers. It doesn't use any pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. Um, you don't really want those anyway, because those things are all detrimental to the life in the soil. We're trying to get that soil life as active as possible, and once it's really humming and firing on all cylinders, that soil life will create the fertility that you need, and it helps create the immune system for the plants, which helps them fight pests and diseases, which eliminates the need for those different chemicals. Again, the Lear garden creates its own soil almost entirely from the urban waste stream. I do put some mineral supplements in there, but I'm actually working towards getting that almost out of there. I want to, if I can, create things entirely from the urban waste stream. I want to divert things from those tree trimmings and the compost and rock powders and all of these other things from the landfill and use them to make soil. The Lear garden requires no daily maintenance. This is one that a lot of people challenge me on. It's like, oh, no daily maintenance, but an hour every other day. No, it's literally only an hour or two a month, depending on the size of your garden and how much you want to take out the soil. Because like I said, the next point it makes, it produces soil as an output. And so it actually builds its soil. It actually works the best if it's actively building the soil. So you can actually take the soil out and put it elsewhere. Lear garden is low water use. In the wintertime, it uses almost no water. In the summertime, my system right now is I've got about probably about 350 square feet of garden, and my garden uses probably about 30, maybe as high as 50 gallons a day, which is just a couple of showers. It's really not that much water. An overall average throughout the year, it's not even a significant dent in my water bill. It's also highly productive. It actually, once you get the soil built and the ecosystem functioning in the soil, it creates quite a bit of food. It's not going to produce all of the food that I need, but it will certainly produce more than I need. Um, so people ask about that sometimes. Well, I'm not growing beef or cheese or baking soda, or wheat. So, there's certain things that I'm still going to get from the grocery store, but I can produce a lot. So here's a good example of a garden that I built, and she liked the look of it enough that this is actually in her front yard. Um, and so this is a kind of a basic Lear garden. It's got a raised bed, makes it real easy to work in. You don't have to bend over. The equipment is all kind of hidden under there. There's a water tank that fills itself automatically with a float valve. There's timers that run the water it flows through. She doesn't have to do anything to keep this garden running. It pretty much, she adds compost to it, harvests, but it pretty much runs itself. She goes out and pokes at it a little bit because she is a gardener herself. But I wanted to kind of show you the productivity. So the first picture here was taken on June 13th. The second picture was taken on July 3rd. And remember, we're having a particularly hot, dry summer this year. These two pictures are only just under 3 weeks apart. So as you can see, the garden really grows well once you get the soil conditions right. It's very, very productive. One of the things that it sounds kind of odd, but I actually worked very hard to design it to be simple. And simple means that it's more flexible in how you can configure it. So here's a couple of examples of what it can look like. The one at the top left is my garden in my backyard. This picture was taken just a couple days ago, I think late last week sometime. And I've got garden beds. I've got chickens that are integrated. The watering system helps clean the water from my chickens. The fish are in the tanks in the back. And it's really, this one's designed for efficiency. It's designed for me to be able to test principles. It's pretty easy to work with. The bottom left here is a garden that I built in the shape of an S, which was kind of the best use of the space that she had available, and it came out looking pretty cool. Top right here is a garden that we built at the Paideia Academy, which is a school. This is designed for really the low maintenance aspect is great for schools. They've got the chickens integrated, the chicken coop, they call it Cluckingham Palace, is down in the lower left corner there. And the chickens have a little pass through where they can access the shade underneath the gardens as well. And, this is, again, something where the maintenance is low enough that they can focus on engagement, not labor, in dealing with this as a school garden. So talking about opportunities, you've got, the first thing that you really have as an opportunity is that you can have an external maintenance. If it only needs a couple of hours a month, you can actually hire a service on pretty much the same business plan as a pool service or a landscaping service to come out and maintain the garden, which takes some of and you can do that at a price point that's going to be affordable, and especially since it comes out of your food budget, not your labor budget. But that's something that can take some of the stress off of the homeowner. But as you start getting more people in an area with these gardens, you can actually use that core maintenance people who are doing regional support. They can start growing plants for starts. They can grow the mushrooms that are needed to kind of keep the mushrooms growing. And then you can start building community. One of the things, if you really want to create a movement, you need the support, you need the community, you need something where you can be proud of what you're doing and how it's working, and you can ask each other questions, and people find out, hey, I did this and it worked really great. and that kind of thing. Then as more and more people start to produce more food than they can eat, we can find ways to use that food, whether it's selling it in local markets or farmers markets, or donating it to food banks, or helping your neighbors out and sharing your food with them. There's so much to do with an abundance of food. One of the other things is it can be combined with agroforestry. Agroforestry is the use of fruit trees, basically, on the property. And if you have that support from those maintenance people, you can get the agroforestry on your urban lot set up right. You have fruit trees that you're also getting produce out of. As you prune the fruit trees, the prunings go into the LEHR Garden. As you harvest soil, the soil goes out to fertilize your fruit trees. It creates kind of a closed loop beneficial ecosystem just on your urban lot, increases the habitat. There's really some amazing benefits if you do it that way. And then, of course, sustainability. It's something that, again, that the people can be proud of, that they're doing something real to benefit sustainability. Different sectors. I've kind of been talking about this from the standpoint of suburbia. Again, the Tesla and solar panels crowd. Definitely, it's something that you can have and be proud of, and that you're really doing a marked difference. Schools, I mentioned a little bit there. It's something that we're working with Paideia. Now I'm working with another school, David Crockett Elementary, and we're possibly creating a community garden there as well. But the schools, again, taking it from maintenance and labor into the realm of engagement. They can engage when and if they want to. Otherwise, the garden runs itself. But there's such a demand for school gardens, and so often, there's nobody to do the maintenance, and it just they fall apart in just a couple of years because nobody wants to take the time. And then, of course, there's food deserts, and the food deserts is something that's kind of a passion of mine. It's something where we really, we've known about food deserts. These are areas where people just aren't getting access to nutritious food. But especially in the Phoenix area, they still have land in the backyards of all those houses, and in a lot of cases, it's just bare dirt. It's unused. So, treating that as a resource. We're actually working on creating the food desert elimination program to work with local nonprofits, local community gardens, to see if we can start really making a dent in those food deserts. So we're moving forward on that. So kind of to wrap up here, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sustainability benefits. Carbon sequestration is a really interesting one. I've been involved in a lot of chats with the regenerative agriculture crowd, and I've talked to a couple of experts. At this point, my calculations are nothing more than that. They're calculations. I haven't had the ability to do actual testing, but I am definitely moving in that direction as I have the resources available. But for reference, right now, our kind of the best that we can do is the holistic management, the adaptive multi-paddock grazing of large herds of hoofed ungulates. And what they're finding, the science has really been coming in just this year. And I think more is coming out soon. What one of their experts says is anything over 2 tons of carbon per acre per year sequestered is extraordinary. And some of the tests are coming in the range of on these things of 10 to 12 tons of carbon per acre per year, which is really, really amazing. The calculations that I'm running, if you just talk about what you're sequestering into the beds themselves, it works out to be about 10 to 15 acres per, or 10 to 15 tons of carbon per acre per year. Now, of course, instead of dealing with 1,000 acres, I'm dealing with 1,000 square feet. But it's one of those things where, if you can get these numbers up, and if you're really integrating it into an overall landscape where you're getting that carbon into the ground and using it to drive your landscape, then there's some really significant benefits there. Rainwater harvesting is another one. In urban areas, we have altered the flood cycle by paving everything. Basically, the water gets there faster, and the peak flood cycle is more damaging because of our paving. And if we can get a lot of people collecting their own rainwater, it helps make a dent in some of that rainwater flooding issues. Water usage is another one. Again, you collecting the rainwater, we're actually using less water overall. If we can get it, if we can move in the direction of gray water usage, that's something that's definitely got a little some hiccups that need to be worked out, but I think it's possible. And if you have a garden that's using, say, 50 gallons of water a day, and you have a garden that's only using a garden that's using about 50 gallons a day, but average gray water production on a household is somewhere around 150 to 200 gallons of water a day. So you actually can produce, you could get to a point where you're not actually using any additional water other than just wastewater. Again, benefits to air quality. Think about all of the green foliage that's filtering the air, pulling carbon out, pulling VOCs out, all of that stuff. Again, all of those leaves help the urban heat island effect, and they're evapotranspirating, which means it cools the air. It brings the humidity up, which could actually help repair some of the small water cycle. Small water cycle being where plants the water evaporates locally and then falls locally. So, and then of course, this doesn't even count in the benefits of reducing food miles and reducing the pollution from industrial agriculture and stuff like that. So that's it for me. I see Lauren popping up.
Yeah, let's see your face.
All right, I will turn my
unshare the screen maybe as well, or we can continue to look at that.
Yeah, I can do that.
But there's lots of questions pouring in, Ed, so I want to start.
Yeah.
So one is, thank you very much for the talk, and it's very interesting. Excuse me. What do you think is the potential for scaling LEHR gardens from the individual to the community level?
To the community level, I think you know, it really just comes down to budget, money. You know, the problem with LEHR gardens, and I'm working towards trying to repair this, is the cost is usually up front. The maintenance costs are actually really low because it's mostly just water. Typically the materials that you're putting in there to create the soil are free. So you're not adding fertilizers, you're not adding that kind of thing, but to actually build the infrastructure that's needed is you know, is kind of that, again, still the barrier to entry. But if there's the desire, if there's the funding, absolutely it can be done. I've run some simulations, and I think that there's really some amazing opportunities for sequencing mushrooms and plants and creating soil, and you know, creating some just extraordinary productivity. But testing needs to be done, and I'm not there yet.
Sure.
Requires
So
resources that I don't have.
We have a number of audience members who just really want to get into the dirt and asking, like, well, so how do you do this exactly? And how does one go about building a LEHR garden at home or as a community garden?
Right now, I'm doing it. I'm working on plans for share out there, but I haven't finished those yet. But I am definitely working on those so that for the DIY crowd. Otherwise, if you're in the Phoenix area, give me a holler. That's what I do for a living right now, is I can build them. It's something that you know, it seems simple, but there's a reason that nobody's come up with this yet. There's a lot of little pieces that have to be right, and I want to make sure that people get pointed in the right direction to hit those points and make it work right.
you need a city permit to build a system like the LEHR Garden in your backyard?
No, certainly I think it probably depends. HOAs are going to be more of an issue, but for the most part, I know City of Tempe, which is where I live, it has to be over 7 feet or what, 250 square feet or something like that. So it has to be pretty large before you need a permit. So,
Okay. Is your work part of an organization or are you a sole entrepreneur?
I'm a sole entrepreneur.
Okay. What's the best way to begin conditioning your soil? Shayna asks, says, I have very healthy clay, no, sorry, very heavy clay, as I'm sure everyone else in the valley has as well. So what's the best way to condition that caliche clay soil?
Compost, 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 compost. It's pretty much, if you add mulch, it might slow down the growth a little bit, but eventually it'll catch up. But really the best thing is treat your soil as if it's alive, feed it.
And this is a good little plug for the city of Tempe and our organics
Yes.
program, Green Organics, because you can pick up free compost from Hardy. It's at Hardy and Rio Salado on the north side. You can just pick it up almost any time of day, bring a truck. And if you want to get the fine tune, the Tempe Gold, they call it, it's like $20 for a truckload or something. But the big chunkier compost is free. And also I know a business called Recycle City, former sustainability grad student, has started a business, and you compost, it's like $10 a month, and they collect your compost and return composted soil to you if you want. So there's lots of ways to get good compost if you don't have access to it, if you live in an apartment or something. So, okay, what about pest management for the gardens? Even with the healthiest of soils, issues do arise. What about different climates in garden structures and issues? Such where we have 110 degrees for 2 months.
Let's see if I can get through remember all of those. So pest management, that's something that's why that biodiversity is really important. I've been doing this for 7 years. I've never sprayed anything. I always get hit by aphids early in the spring, January, February. But the soil is healthy enough. It keeps the plants healthy enough. And those aphids ring the dinner bell for all of the predator insects. And they come and take care of them every single time. Every now and then I'm getting a little bit of a squash bug outbreak. It's not really bad. The birds and the other insects are kind of taking care of them, but I just go out, every couple of days and squish them. Occasionally you lose a couple of plants, but it's not really that big of a deal.
The second part of the question is, what about different climates and garden structures / issues?
Climates, I have mine outside, so it's going to obviously have to be designed for the climate. In a cold climate, you can in a cold climate, you can put it in a greenhouse. You can shut it down for the winter. There's a couple of different ways to do that. Here, shade structures help. I have never put one on mine. It's currently thriving despite the brutal summer that we've had. What was that last question?
Just talking about the weather we have in Arizona, the heat. They didn't ask this, but as a corollary, do you have to use shade screens at all in the summer?
You don't have to. If you're not going to, then it's better to pick the plants that can handle the summer heat. Things like squash and okra and some of the things that will take the heat. But in the wintertime, you don't need them at all.
Okay, here's Danielle, who asked a good question about the affordability of gardens. You briefly mentioned the cost, but doing a quick search online, the initial costs of LEHR gardens are higher than starting a raised bed or an in-ground garden. Affordability for schools, is that an issue? Are you working with government to receive incentives or reimbursements, such as with solar panels? Do you have estimated costs of maintaining the garden? Any numbers of food yield in general or per foot of garden space or however you measure it? A lot of questions, but basically about the affordability and just the comparisons.
Yeah. And I've got, unfortunately right now I'm moving towards manufactured systems, which should be able to bring that cost down. I'm just, again, not there yet. I don't have the resources for it. The system, for example, the one that I showed you, the small raised bed garden, that was about 2000. Something like that is going to be in that range. And I've got a couple of different models that range typically from about 2000 to about 3000 for that. But as you scale up, a lot of the equipment doesn't scale with it. So larger systems are actually cheaper per square foot than smaller systems. It's something that I've got a couple of basic systems out there, that are that I've got pre-priced. Otherwise, I'm an engineer. I can fit them to the site. Um, let's see, what were the as for schools, I'm not sure where Paideia got their money. That was something that they did. I think they might have gone for a grant. They were working with ASU. David Crockett is working through Crichton Community Foundation, and they're getting their grants. So it's something yeah, the upfront costs are pretty good. The maintenance costs are not super high. It's something that, again, like I said, once you get it going, there's water, and if you can, just keep the soil going and collect the materials that you need to make soil, there's not a lot to it. Seeds, plants, fish if you need them, that kind of thing.
There's somebody criticizing my dog background and says my screen should be blank. So sorry, dogs are some of my favorite people these days. So
love the dogs. Absolutely love the dogs.
So someone, Kaz asks, are you familiar with the vibrational frequency movement from about 15 to 20 years ago? Specifically, these were being broadcast over farms and orchards for fertilizer and pest control. It was successful with extremely high yields, called Bloom or something.
I am not familiar with that.
She'll have to be. Okay. Someone talks about their compost not happening. Are there any workshops available?
For workshops, if there's a demand, we could certainly do a composting workshop. It's certainly something, in I'm a lazy composter. My LEHR Garden does all the work for me. I just throw food in and it disappears. Yeah. So that's super easy for me, but composting is something that I've done a lot of.
I think there's a lot of workshops. I mean, there's a lot of online resources there that I would point to.
Yeah.
Because you can find out from Recycle City. They can do it for you too. They have the bokashi method. You sprinkle the flakes over composted material in a bin.
Yeah.
It's back as beautiful compost. All right, we have, is it possible to retrofit a LEHR garden into an existing raised bed garden, or does it require a blank slate / open land?
The only thing that's really a requirement for a LEHR garden is it has to have an impermeable barrier, because the water is captured and reused, and it has to be able to drain down to something and then pump it back up. That's it. Everything else is negotiable. So yeah, you could do, like, if you could dig one part of the bed out a little bit deeper and then put a pond liner in it, and then just put a screen there, and then just kind of incorporate the whole thing into the existing garden. As long as it flows through, yeah, it can be done.
Well, do you remember when I visited your garden at your house, we thought that political signs, nobody knows what to do with them. You can make solar ovens out of them, but they can't really be recycled. But you can use the political signs as the liner because they're impermeable. Isn't that right?
You'd have to find a way of attaching them so it doesn't leak between them, but yeah.
Between them, yeah, right.
Yeah, but like big banner signs, those totally could be used.
Right, right. Yeah. Do you yourself plan on having workshops in the future?
I could, yeah. If there's demand for it, definitely.
Yeah, folks, you can email me at lauren.kuby@asu.edu with any ideas that you have or requests, and we can get more events like this going. Someone wrote that Joan Barron, the wonderful environmental artist and practitioner Joan Barron, wrote that Clark Park Community Garden in Tempe has a volunteer program where you can participate and learn how to compost. So she's sending that out to the universe here. And let's see, we don't have any other questions, maybe time for one more. In the meantime, I will just let folks know that we have a whole bunch of virtual events coming up. And next week on September 15th, at 1 o'clock, we're going to be hosting Fabric, the Fashion and Business Resource Innovation Center. And Angela Johnson and Sherry Barry, they have converted their fashion operation into a PPE production company. They've done amazing work. They're using recycled materials. They're creating, they've created over 200,000 reusable gowns, PPE gowns that have incredible life because they can be washed so many times. So you'll learn about their model and how they transitioned from doing fashion to PPE, and seemed like it was, you know, a minute. I'm sure it was a long and arduous process, but there's such a wonderful Tempe company and great women. So you could tune in then. And we have a lot of other events coming up. You can go to sustainability.asu.edu. We have a slate of Island Press authors talking about, we have anti-racist feminist leadership on climate and energies coming up on October 1st. And we have revolutionary power, an activist guide to the energy transition on November 19th. So check out all these wonderful events. We're finding we're having bigger audiences with our virtual structure here, and we're having people from all over the world tuning in. So it's an opportunity for us to get authors who are really making news, and we can get them at our ASU virtual campus. Okay, thank you, Edmund. Paula wrote, your talk was great and interesting. Let's see. Thanks for sharing your expertise, said Jessica. And thank you for the presentation. The LEHR Gardens are an important contribution to sustainable local food systems and regenerative agriculture's discussion. So that will conclude our series. Do you have any just concluding remarks, Ed?
Thanks for having me. I think we need to get out there and be more sustainable.
Yeah, thanks for all you do. And folks, we will have a tour to Ed's Garden sometime in the spring, I hope. It's an amazing thing to see. And with that, we thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you at our next Sustainability Series talk. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Brandon behind the scenes. Take care.